What's going on, everyone? Scott here. Welcome back to the channel. So, Bachelor in Paradise, episode 7, final 4 episodes of the season. So, we're really getting down to it as we are fully into the competition portion of this summer of Paradise now. But before we do jump into this episode, if you could just hit that like and subscribe button down there. We'll have more Bachelor in Paradise content on the channel over these next couple weeks as we close this season, the 10th season of Bachelor in Paradise. Just make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a video. So, heading forward to day 13 of Paradise. Alex trying to teach Andrew some French. Brian and Parisa working out on the beach. And Brian and Parisa are also still trying to work through some of their issues. Kim tells Faith that they need to talk. She kind of freaks out a little bit, but Kim's heart rate was still out of whack. We know that from, last week, the last couple weeks throughout his time here. His heart had been doing some weird stuff, as he'd said a couple times, but said it is better today, but they want to put a heart monitor on, just to monitor everything, make sure everything is continuing to go okay. Wells and Hannah show up for the next relationship test, and everyone walks to the secret garden where Jesse is kind of in the center of this, little circle thing, contraption with doors and whatnot. They all go to their own, siloed, door and put headphones on as Jesse starts talking to them. And the goal of this relationship test is to see if the person that you're partnered with is really essentially your best match. And then going forward with who will be going home this week, everyone will vote as to which man will not get a rose to hand out at the rose ceremony. And then the couple with the most answers will win this relationship test, and that man will automatically be safe, in turn getting the rose to give out to his partner at the rose ceremony. But, so that couple is the couple with the most matching answers win, but you can match with someone else other than your partner. And if you match 5 times with someone other than your partner, you get to come to the center, see who it is, and enter the circle of truth, essentially calling it, and a chance at a secret rendezvous later that night where you don't have to tell anyone, no one knows. That's why it's called a secret rendezvous. But we get into it, and Jonathan and Leah end up winning, actually, which is hilarious because they're really the only one or two who not actually romantically in a relationship, but and especially after how the rose ceremony had just went. Just the end of last episode. So funny that they end up winning. Then we go through everyone who matched who was not in a couple. Alicia matches with Andrew, but Andrew says that he's really in with Alex and not really interested. Dale matches with Parisa, Kim and Kathy, Alex and Jeremy, Kat and Brian, Jeremy and Leah, Bailey and Spencer, Bailey and Brian. Brian tells Bailey to consider it, though. Everyone is just writing this off. No one's interested in secret rendezvous at this point, which I think is a good sign, in terms of fostering, true relationships from it. But Brian tells her to consider it. But we know this why from, the previews at the top of the episode, but then, just kind of him talking about it, that, Bailey's obviously thrown off from this, but we know this isn't like a romantic thing or anything. Brian wants to tell her about what Jeremy said about Susie and, calling Susie and whatnot after she left and saying he regretted his decision and all that. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition, should I say. Kat says that Keith and Kathy apparently said that they can't or aren't, or didn't come with the truest intentions. I think, and we get a little bit more explanation later, so not to go kind of out of order, but, they just, not a romantic relationship, but they're just enjoying this journey and looking to enjoy life together, as Kathy kind of explained it later in the episode, to jump forward a little bit. And they're more like platonic, kind of like Jonathan and Leah. But Jonathan does pull Leah, and, they talk, and, he was upset about how last night went. Obviously, we saw the rose ceremony, where she was like, "You're welcome," handing him the rose. But she says how she was upset, hearing that, he just wanted a friendship out of this and not hearing it from him directly, hearing it from everyone else, other people in the house. He says that he didn't know that she liked him. And, he's saying that, I'm not saying it can't change, whatever. As Leia says, he's kind of just emotionally unavailable, but she says she's not going to chase a man, as she shouldn't, but they agree to kind of just let it slide and keep it moving. And for them, it's all about the game now, winning that $500,000. Brian shows up at the secret rendezvous, waits for Bailey. She never shows up, though. Bailey and Parisa are talking in the room, and Bailey says that someone asked her, but wouldn't go. Parisa's trying to get out if it was Brian. And, Bailey's not telling anyone. But Bailey goes to tell Jeremy. Jeremy was already sleeping. He was already out for the night. And, they're basically like, okay, let's just send him home. Bailey thinks that he was trying to be sneaky. And Brian tells Parisa that he did ask Bailey on the rendezvous, but pulls her to the side as he's telling her this to chat and said, something's been weighing on him, but doesn't want to say it. It's not, for romantic reasons or anything, and he tells her, that Jeremy called Susie and starts kind of explaining everything. She's like, oh, okay, that, makes sense then. And, he wants to tell her because, as he said, Bailey's a sweetheart and everyone likes her, everyone loves her, whatnot. But, obviously this is a big, sensitive topic. And Spencer and Jess are doing really good and even seems to be thinking about life outside of Paradise. Bailey comes and talks to Spencer and Jess about the rendezvous, how it was kind of weird. And Brian ends up walking up and, Bailey's like, do you want to chat? And so they talk and Parisa tells Alex that Jeremy called Susie. And I believe she knows. We see that she does know. And, apparently a lot of people know besides Bailey, essentially, is what we're getting out of this, that a good amount of the house knew this. And Bailey wants to know if there's something that she needs to know. Brian's not really saying anything at first, kind of just, awkward. And Brian's like, I don't know if it'll be helpful. Brian asks if they discussed his one-on-one with Susie, Jeremy's one-on-one with Susie. She said they didn't. They both agreed to kind of just squash each of their dates as she went on one with Andrew as well. And he tells her that Jeremy expected Susie to stay, that someone would give her a rose to say, and that he said that he made the wrong decision and wished that she chose Susie. He just goes down the line here and says, and how he called her as well and told her that, she wants her, or that he wants her to come back. But obviously she said, it was too emotional, that she couldn't. And during the bird dance thing from a couple episodes ago, he said that if Susie came back here, he'd propose on the spot. And said as soon as he leaves, he's hitting her up to connect. She says, thank you. And she said, sorry, I thought you were trying to be sneaky. She says, it sucks because I like him so much. And he said, half the people here do know that, so everyone kind of knows this behind Bailey's back. And, people start recognizing Bailey and Brian talking and everyone's like, he wouldn't be telling her about Jeremy, would he? Bailey goes and wakes up Jeremy and says, did you call Susie? He does say yes, but he says, I don't want to be with her. Like, I want to be with you. And he says, sorry, I should have told you. Says that, he was playing Paradise, was interested in two people and was just playing, Paradise, trying to get to know people, which, in a point is fair, but, it kind of two sides. I'll get through everything and then get my opinion on this. But, Brian feels really uncomfortable, doesn't know if he should have done it, and is worried about how the house will react. And Brian's playing dumb when Dale kind of comes up and asks, like, you weren't saying about the, Jeremy, the phone call thing. And he's like, what? No, like, what do you mean? No. And Dale ends up saying, like, no, like, I knew Brian wouldn't do that. His integrity and character is too high. And Brian's like, yeah, yep, totally. And Bailey's in her room and, she just wants to go home. She starts packing. Alex goes to check on her and Alex feels guilty for not telling her. But she didn't want to be the one to make things worse in their relationship. Jeremy said he'd go home if Bailey left, as, he said he'd have no reason to be here. Whether she wants to go home with him or not is up to her. We go forward to day 14 of Paradise. Jeremy and Bailey go for a walk to talk through everything. He realizes he messed up and needs to fix it, but he does lie about saying that he would propose to her because that is video evidence that he did say these words. You will see this on television. If they are still together or whatnot, you will have seen this on television a handful of episodes ago, however many episodes that was. But they come together and seem to move on in a sense of, as she kind of says, allows more grace in this type of situation than she would in real life. Kathy says that Kim's got handy with every girl that, he's tried to have a connection with here until someone finally accepted him. Bailey now lies to Jeremy that she says that she doesn't want to send Brian home because he just wanted to meet with her to ask more questions about Parisa. Bailey won't tell Kat or anyone who told her about Jeremy's phone call to Susie. We're at the cocktail party and everyone's assuming it's going to be a Golden going home, but Dale tells Brian that everyone thinks the info about Jeremy's phone call came from him. Conversations start coming around and Brian can tell everyone is talking about him. Dale tells Brian what's going on so, he can know how to act, which, I guess, a friend looking out for a friend, I guess you could take it that way. Parisa tells Brian that he should just grab Jeremy and basically clear the air, essentially. Brian does grab Jeremy, tells him, the combo with Bailey was asking about Parisa, but then he says, tells him that Bailey kind of brought up about if there was anything should know or like see back on TV about Susie, exactly how he worded it. And so it essentially comes to light that he was the one that told Bailey this information, but just kind of framed it in a different way. Jeremy's like, I don't think that was your place. Don't really understand it. Bailey starts to talk to everyone, and the guys are all like to Brian that, you should have just talked to Jeremy first. And everyone's going at him essentially. And, I agree in a sense, but disagree in a lot of senses. And, start bringing up bro code, like, oh, you should have talked to Jeremy and all this. And Wells hits it right, the nail on the head. And he's like, am I going crazy? Because I think everyone's crazy. No one thinks this is a huge red flag that Jeremy didn't tell Bailey about this, even, after. If you didn't say it, right when it happened, but after you start, connecting more, it seems like they do have a strong connection at this point. If it's real, if it's not real, like whatever. But he's like, everyone's mad at Brian when they should be mad at the person who actually did this. And this is kind of the thing. And Wells says, he's like, I understand bro code, but this is turning into D-bag code. And I completely agree with him. Like, and listen, I can't believe I'm defending Brian here, because I did not really care for him on his season when he was on The Bachelorette. Don't really like him on this season, but I do think he was doing the true thing. And I hate when this happens, whether Bachelor or Bachelor in Paradise or whatever, when it's like a bro code thing and you shouldn't say it. It's like, dude, if you did something that messed up, you should say it. I do see a portion of their reasoning that, hey, you should have, if it was really bothering you or weighing on you this much because you are friends with Bailey and, she is a sweet person and you care about her, whatnot, then you maybe could have pushed Jeremy a little bit harder to say that. But in a sense, now that they are in a game portion now, it's like Brian could be like, Jeremy's just going to use that as even more fuel to try to get him out. So, agree with like 25%, but disagree with like 75% of the arguments on these sides here. And I'm sorry, Dale saying that this was probably going to be talked about tomorrow. You didn't need to put yourself in this situation. Highly disagree. No shot this was getting talked about until, when did this happen? About 3-4 weeks ago now? No shot, unless if they were still together, no shot that if this was brought up about 4 or 5 weeks ago before this episode came out. No shot that it was ever brought up, tomorrow or why they're still on Paradise. Absolutely no shot. So I highly disagree with that. But we head to the cocktail party and it's time to vote. Seems like coming down to Kim and Brian, essentially. Seems like Keith is getting a few votes as well to not receive a rose. Jonathan, obviously at first, gives his rose to Leia, and he hits her back with a "You're welcome," the little payback from the last rose ceremony. Spencer to Jess, Andrew to Alex, Dale to Kat, Sean to Alicia, Jeremy to Bailey. And then we get into the final 3 people who need roses, with only 2 roses left. Keith gets a rose, gives it to Kathy, obviously, and the final rose does go to Brian. Gives his to Parisa, obviously, and that means Kim and Faith will unfortunately be going home. And, as they're walking out, they do say that they intend to work on their relationship outside of Paradise, said that they'll work on their relationship outside of Paradise. So good for them, and hope everything works out. And, if it's meant to be with them, it's meant to be, and enjoy each other's company on this, connection that they started here in Paradise. But next week we have another relationship test. I'm pretty sure we'll have one every week now that we go through this. And they're voting as a group as to which 2 women will not be receiving a rose. Now, some game coming in discussing who do we get rid of? Do we get rid of the strongest couple and XYZ? So definitely some gameplay going to be starting to come on now at this point, even though I do kind of like what Spencer said, that, they want to get down to the couples who are actually couples, not just the couples, say like a Jonathan and Leia, who are, more platonic at this point, which if that actually happens, but we see going into next week that that's not the case, because people bring up Spencer and Jess being the strongest couple and wanting to possibly get them out. So, definitely some game coming in. Major drama, it seems like, coming into the rose ceremony, seemingly between Sean, Alicia, Kat involved, but we're getting down to it. I imagine these rose ceremonies are going to get more insane, and we've had a handful of crazy rose ceremonies this year. So yeah, definitely. We're coming down to it. Last 3 episodes. I'm excited to see how this all kind of comes to a conclusion here. But anyway, that'll do it for this one. We'll be back next week. So thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.